if you just look back on your day and just go, how many of the decisions did I make today were energy vampire decisions versus Energist decisions, right? And then just tomorrow, just make one more Energist decision.
Welcome, Australia. It's that time again for another podcast from the Mate team, where we try and get into your head with stuff that makes us sound smart. Sit back and relax. It's time for us to be mates. In today's episode, we are talking to Sean Hall, who is the founder and Chief Energiser of Energx. Sean works with Australian organisations who share the belief that the most valuable, sustainable and high growth potential asset they have is the collective energy and creativity of their people. At Mate, our people are at the heart and soul of our company, so we really resonate with this philosophy. 2020 has brought about many new challenges to people's mental health and well-being, with much of the change happening essentially overnight, from lockdowns, working from home, to new routines and social isolation. We're going to chat with Sean in a more detail about those mental health challenges, as well as some strategies to help combat these stresses, including the benefits of play for adults and Sean's collaboration with Lego. As a business, we have seen firsthand the impacts of mental health issues on our staff and extended families, and whilst we try to do our bit to support mental health in our families, there are always new strategies and ideas we can learn about. Sean, welcome to the Let's Be Mates podcast. Great to have you on board.
Really excited to be here.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, mate. And look, I mean, we love speaking to people with similar mindsets and doing great things in Australia, particularly in the Australian community. And it's great to have you on board and to give a view of what you're doing to our audience, which has grown over the last couple of months. And we call this the second season of our podcast series, Dom, right? Yeah, so it's getting a bit of traction. I don't know why people want to listen to us, but hey, we'll keep talking if they keep listening, right? So, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Sean. It's it's good to chat. Maybe just for our audience, just to give you a little bit, obviously giving a little bit of background in the intro, but maybe just give a bit of an intro of yourself, where you've been to date, and you know what your role is at Energx as well.
So I guess there's sort of two things which have led me to do what I do today. The first was having senior executive roles at another big telco, and one of those was I was head of brand strategy and marketing. So I was running a $9 billion brand. I was responsible for the customer experience of 16 million customers. And then the second role I had there, I did a bit of a career pivot where I went into HR, which was a bit weird for a marketer. But the reason for that was that I believed that your customer experience is a product of your employee experience. And therefore, if you want to deliver more innovative, better customer experiences, you need to look after your people first. And while I was there, though, I burnt out twice because I sort of say that I love my job too much in a way. Like, there are not many roles that you get of that scale, even globally. So I threw everything into it. The tipping point for me with the first time I burnt out was I literally found myself wandering around David Jones one day, not knowing how I got there. I was running a massive transformation program at the time. I was working silly hours. I'd leave work at 2 a.m. I'd be back at 6. I say that one of the perhaps lesser known warning signs of burnout is when you're wearing your Speedos for undies, because you don't have any time to really look after yourself, even with that sort of thing. And the second burnout was really just a bit more in my head. It was a lot, actually more around losing my confidence. I'd expanded my role. I'd expanded my responsibilities as a result of sort of being so successful in my marketing role that I sort of felt like I was spinning my wheels, and that started to play with my head a little bit, essentially. So that sort of is one of the big reasons why I focus on what I do today, because when I was going through those two events, when I was looking for resources to help me get well, what I found was most men's mental health resources focus on the extremes. So there's a lot of focus on suicide, depression, anxiety, addiction, that type of stuff. And I'm like, well, that's not me. I don't have any of those things. I've come to call what happened to me an energy crisis because I just literally had nothing left in my tank. Right? My batteries are fully gone, completely depleted. And so I had to really take more responsibility for the decisions I was making, because I was like, well, I can't change my company. I'm one of like 80,000 people that either are a partner or employee here. So I can't change that whole, massive shit, but I can look at taking more responsibility for myself, and I can make myself more aware of the decisions that I made that perhaps I wasn't aware were impacting me. Because the irony, I guess, in everything that I did was my first career was actually in the fitness industry. And I spent 16 years jumping around in Lycra all over the world, teaching group fitness classes and as an international presenter. And I'm even on Michelle Bridges' DVDs as one of her sort of backup guys, and so I knew a lot about the physical side of well-being, but I didn't know how the other decisions I was making were impacting me. So things like letting my inner critic beat me up, just being a perfectionist, being a yes man, all of these sorts of things were ultimately decisions that I made that led me to be vulnerable. And so I then, I guess, taken it upon myself to try to, first of all, talk more about what happened to me before people, get to the more serious issues and need professional help, but then also to make people very aware of the, the warning signs, which are just everyday things that we've never been taught. Because I guess what I've seen and observed is we've never really been taught how to be well, not holistically, and then even though we know we should do this stuff, we often don't do it. So we've got to find different ways in to motivate people to actually practice self-care and not to feel like it's a selfish thing, but it's really about being the best version of yourself and turning up as the best person you want to be for the people you care about the most. And also at the end of the day, whatever you're working on, whether it's something at home or at work, professionally, being proud of that, of the standard that you've been able to do, because at the end of the day, I sort of say you can only achieve what you've got energy for. And that's really comes down both to quantity and quality of that energy. And so really that's what I do today is I go and I work with individuals through to whole organizations, and I will assess them based on these warning signs that I've worked out. And then based on that data, everything we start from, an individual's data, we will then design the right program, which, I'm sort of using the language around anti-burnout now, because I think it's something there. So like, I feel like we talk a lot about resilience, but that word has been hijacked a bit. And often it's sort of like almost judgmental. So whenever we talk about resilience, it's almost like we're telling people they're not. Whereas humans are hugely resilient beings. So I feel like that sort of judgmental approach doesn't sit well with me. And so because my favorite definition of resilience that I've heard is it's just the ability to get punched in the face over and over again, right? And who wants that? No one wants to just get punched in the face over and over again. So I talk about anti-burnout, which is essentially building the skill that I've created called energy intelligence, which is a self-awareness thing, just to knowing exactly, what's energizing me, what's depleting me, helping me set new energy goals, and then building myself a little plan, essentially, of little skills and practices that will get me to my energy goals over time and allow me to sustain myself, especially in times like this. We've got so much uncertainty, so much change. I think this is something that's going to become more and more important that we invest in. And that's sort of the personal side. And then the business side of why I ended up here is actually when I left Telstra, what I was most passionate about there was I was head of disability on the Diversity Council, and I'd seen, I guess, the stories of even the people that managed to get a job at Telstra, and I think we need to keep aware of the fact that the majority of disabilities are invisible as well. But we really struggled, even as a huge brand of 40,000 people, to even just hire 100 people with disabilities. And then when I went out and talked to those people, what I saw was there was the stories were sort of heartbreaking in many ways. They really got to me. And then the other thing was that what I saw was there was a disconnect between the value that people with disabilities believe they have, because society's sort of told them they're not valuable, they're worthless, and actually their true capability, their true ability to actually contribute. And so my first startup was actually called Diversity X, which was a coaching platform to help people with disabilities get jobs. Amazing. And that unfortunately failed. And the reason that it failed, I diagnosed, was that whenever I was asking people to help a person with a disability, I was asking them to help change someone's life. And that's a lot to ask people, and most of us our capacity is sort of diminished in some ways, right? It's enough just to look after ourselves. And so what I saw was there was this energy deficit, essentially, but there's also a corresponding empathy deficit, because when you're in survival mode, empathy requires action. Like, you can be sympathetic, but empathy requires action. And so, like, the overarching sort of purpose of, and so it was basically from that failure that I went, oh, hey, I actually know how to energize people. I've been doing it since, since a baby aerobics instructor at 18. And then that was even, I guess, the common thread through my whole career was I was always taking, a brand, a team, a product, a culture from one place to a better place. Yeah. And so it was really that combination of all of those experiences that led me to launch Energx. And essentially, if I was to boil it down to just one thing, all we want to do is help people have more gas in the tank and hope they use that for good.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you've spoken about a lot there, which just hits home so much through my corporate journey, as well as my, this business journey at Mate as well. And, I love how you focus on the word energy versus mental health and all these different things, because it comes in so many different shapes and forms. And ultimately, it's energy that gets you through, in my opinion, gets you through everything, whether it be if you're having challenging mindset or you feel like you're not achieving something. I mean, the energy keeps you going, right? And in our business, we have a weekly motivation check. We call it motivation check, and it's so crucial to our business, because we've gone so fast, so quick, so hard, so soon, that you just lose. You're doing so much, and you're taking it all on board, and you're not giving yourself self-care. You're not focusing on what you need outside of the business to make sure that you keep that drive going, and so on and so forth. And we probably about 3 months ago, Dom, I think we introduced this motivation check, because we started getting angry with each other, right? We started saying, oh, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And there's simple stuff that we shouldn't get angry about, because we all know the process. We all know what we're doing. We all know what we're trying to achieve, right? And we were just getting angry because we were tired. We were, we wanted to get things moving and all these different things. And honestly, people were losing motivation. Motivation affected their mental health, affected their outcomes, their objectives, everything that was happening. And it was just a cascade effect, right? And look, I think the luxury we've got as a business that started, we were able to put these parameters and foundations in place, where you've got businesses that have been around for 30 or 20 years or so, who are now learning the scale of focusing on mental health, focusing on their staff, self-care, diversity, inclusion, all these different things. But even if you start from that era, it's still hard you can talk about it, but it's still hard to implement, right? Is that what you've found when you've spoken to businesses and people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, these are all complex issues. They're wicked problems, which requires us to really, step back and sort of look at a whole system, that we're creating. And I do think, I actually just got appointed the chair of the Workplace Mental Health Summit that's coming up.
Awesome.
At the end of March. And yesterday I was lucky enough to be chatting. We've got an amazing lineup, but I was chatting to this guy called Jim Kelly, who's essentially responsible for Safe Work New South Wales, and they're talking about how, we're starting to now look at this as the way in which we enable business performance to start with. So instead of well-being being a tick box or another priority that's competing with all these other priorities, how does it actually become an enabler of the business in the first place? And this is something that I think needs to happen when you just look at the macro trends around the nature of work, the future of jobs. If you were to look at all the staff that you hired, I can't remember how many you said you've got now. I just remember 19 of them.
70.
Is that, you'd look at those jobs, you go, well, did I buy their brains or did I buy their biceps?
Yeah.
Right. And if you bought their brains, then mental well-being needs to be at the center of personal and business performance, because that in itself creates a huge risk if those brains are not working or performing at their best, or if people don't know how to light them up, or like you said, if your ability as a business to grow is going to be determined by the capacity of the individuals in that business. And so, and you've noticed those warning signs, right? Is that when we are depleted, I sort of talk about this thing called, I call it a performance paradox, right? Where I say there's no intelligence without energy, right? Our ability to learn, even when we're really smart, we make really dumb decisions, or we don't behave as our best when we're depleted. So that's the first thing we've got to realize. Okay, well, what types of intelligence do I need in my business for me to succeed? And that could be really human stuff, or it could be really technical skills. And then the paradox of that is that there's actually no energy without intelligence. So we need to know those micro skills that actually do build our capacity. And that's sort of, that's ultimately what led me to create Energy Intelligence. I just think the more that we can learn these little skills, the better we'll be for ourselves, to each other. And as I said, like just having a little bit of spare to give a little bit back somewhere as well, is the ideal outcome.
Sean, this is not a new issue, but thankfully it's getting some light, seen the light of day. Last year in particular, and it's rolled into this year now, probably one of the most transformative years for workplaces in good and bad ways. But what have you seen that 2020 and the COVID situation really highlighted as more, I'll say mental health, but more issues workplace issues that you've seen come up?
There's a lot, right? I think there's some really great macro stuff that's happening, and I'm very lucky to spend a lot of time talking to other very smart people. And one of those smart people the other day I talked to was a woman called Louise Howard, who's head of safety for transport for New South Wales. And what she said is, COVID has been a great equalizer, right? Because prior to this, when we talked about mental well-being, we were talking about this group of people over here, right, that were experiencing depression, anxiety, or other issues and crisis, essentially. And we sort of had them over here stigmatized, right? And what we've all experienced through COVID is that we've all shifted up and down this mental health continuum, right? There was this dominant narrative going on that you're either mentally healthy or you're not. And that's just not the reality, right? We literally can move up and down just depending on, what we experience. Again, like how well we're looking after ourselves. A lot of things are going to come in swings and roundabouts. So I think that's a really great point, is that hopefully what we see coming out of this is much more empathy around this issue, because more people have experienced what it's like to not be at their best. I think that one of the biggest things that we've seen happen, and for most people, is that I have this, this belief, or that's philosophy, that as its center of a lot of what I do. And that is the fact that I feel like as humans, we're designed to be in rhythm. And so that starts from a survival perspective, right? Like it starts with our heart rate, it starts with our breath, it starts with getting enough sleep with our circadian rhythm. And then those survival rhythms, when we're really good at them, become performance rhythms. That's when you end up being an elite athlete. right? When you can get your heart rate right down, you build your lung capacity, all of these sort of things. Even if I think Venus Williams or Serena Williams sleeps like 12 hours a night, right? Like these are performance rhythms. But what COVID did is it disrupted all of our rhythms. And so what happened was that and this is where, mindfulness, I guess, is a different way of looking at mindfulness and its application, is that a lot of those new rhythms that we created, we did on autopilot or mindlessly, right? So you get a lot of people that are suddenly saying, oh, how did I end up with 2 extra meetings, a day instead of my commute? Why am I exhausted because I've got back-to-back video meetings? I'm not getting out of the house at all. I'm not getting any exercise, any fresh air, any vitamin D, all of these sorts of things, which are so essential just to like our base level, functioning and being well. And so I think what we have the opportunity to do now is actually reassess all of our rhythms, because even if you think about prior to COVID, you'd probably be doing the same morning rhythm like for years and years and years, to the point that you actually can't even remember half of the time what you were doing in that, right? You're so on autopilot. And so it becomes, I guess, a way for us to reassess, are those rhythms energizing or are they depleting? And this is again one of the reasons why I focus on energy, because I think like there's a lot of stuff around our well-being which is quite binary when you come back to the decisions that we're making. It's like I talk about, you're either making an energy vampire decision, right? So you're doing something which depletes you and potentially depletes other people, like having an argument or not being so nice to each other, or an energy vampire decision is not getting enough sleep or not going outside and moving, not eating enough vegetables. It can be very, very simple. Or you can make an energist decision, which are these decisions that expand your energy and the energy of others. And the great thing, coming back to your point before, is that conversations around energy, I don't think are scary for people. When we start to move into more serious territory and we start talking about depression and, suicide, addiction, any of those things, those can be very, very scary conversations. Yeah, not just to be vulnerable to share, but to actually hear as well, because you're like, oh shit, if someone shares that with me, what do I do? And that can be a reason why people don't lean into the issue as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess when there's a very clear choice around, energy vampires or energy decision, that, and maybe it's not at the time, but in hindsight you go, yeah, that's one way or another. But I noticed myself just after, a couple months into COVID, I was sort of feeling those, initial signs of burnout. And one thing I realised is that, especially in the afternoon at the end of the day, I used to have a 30 to 40 minute commute where I decompress from the day, I listen to podcasts, listen to music, before I went home to my other job of being a husband and father and cooking dinner and all that sort of thing. But now I was 8 steps from that instead of 40 minutes. So I realised that was being a big, energy sucker for me, and, had to try and take some steps towards bridging that gap, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like what you're highlighting there is that, so many people have experienced that. We've seen there's some really scary stats coming out around parental burnout. Like scary in a couple of ways. One is that mums are actually feeling it more, and overall burnt out more than the dads. But the dads actually, just the way that we see normally around mental health, take it further, right? They're more likely to catastrophize, to have suicidal ideation, all of these sorts of things. So, and part of this, and we come back to rhythms, is what we've seen eroded essentially almost overnight is these boundaries, right, that we had before. And so it's so much harder to have these boundaries when we're working from home full time, or we're doing homeschooling, all of that sort of stuff. And so it's a really important point of reflection to just go, okay, well, what boundaries am I going to create for myself? Healthy energist boundaries, that say this is where my day starts and stops, and even if it means that, so you don't have that 40-minute commute, instead of just going straight into your, into dad mode, you go for a walk around the block, like it's just these circuit breakers that we need to really incorporate into our day that are really important.
Yeah, fantastic.
So, Sean, what strategies do you suggest to people that may be experiencing mental health issues and stresses?
So the very first thing that I think is really important for us all to understand is actually how our brains are working in times like this. So if we feel off, if we feel our mood is affected, the reason for that is what we know is that our dopamine in our brain is actually killed by uncertainty, right? So our brains are working the way they should, and we're all human in feeling the way that we do, right? So that's a really big part for us to just accept and be kind to ourselves and know that this is a unique situation, but that our brains are actually keeping us in sort of survival mode at the time. What we know, though, from a neuroscience point of view, is that we can get our dopamine flowing again, and it's really just two steps. The first is that we have to focus on what we can control, and the second is we have to act on those things. So obviously nothing changes unless we act. And so then you start to say, okay, well, what is it that I can control? Because a lot of us, again, really human, we're distracted by all of these things that are outside of our control, and so we need to remind ourselves and pull ourselves back in the first thing, because every time that every time that we are focusing on the stuff that's outside of our control, that is contributing to our stress. And so what I say is there's three things you can control. The first is taking responsibility for your own energy. So what are the self-care decisions that I'm making every day that recharge my batteries, right? And I need to prioritize that, especially in times like this. The second thing I can control is I can take responsibility for my energy impact on other people. So how do I turn up? How do people feel when I'm not in the room, or I've just been in the room? And this doesn't matter whether we're in the room together or in a virtual sense, we're still going to have an energy impact on each other, because energy is contagious, right? It's just the way it is. And then the third thing we can control is being really good at what we do, right? So being a master of our craft, learning, being proud of what you produce or contribute, but then also being pragmatic and kind to yourself, and knowing that perhaps with everything that's going on, you might not be as productive, as you have been before. Things might take a little bit longer. You might find yourself a little bit more foggy with your brain and stuff like that. And so that's the first step, is okay, what can I control? Right? And now I'm going to act on those things. And so from there, it just becomes almost like building yourself a lot of, I guess, a toolkit of strategies, skills, practices that feel right for you. And a lot of this comes down to experimentation, because not everything is going to work for everybody. And so this is key, is not to compare yourself to other people, what they're doing, because they've got a completely different context from yours. And so the way that we generally help people is we have a little 5-minute assessment that helps people work out what's energizing them, what's depleting them, and then that gives us the basis for talking about these skills. But what I can share with you is some ones that just from all the data, like we've assessed almost 8,000 people now, what we're sort of seeing out there. And the first is, when we talk about getting present to these decisions, is actually looking at ways that boost your mood, right? So one of the ones that I love to get people to do is I get them to create what I call a calm plan. So calm is CALM, right? So an acronym. So it's like at the start of the day, go, C stands for connect. Who am I going to connect with today in a meaningful way? And so, sometimes when we're not at our best, we don't want to connect. We don't want to sort of burden people, but it's so important that we do that. The second thing is A stands for act. And so actors could be about self-care. It could be about learning something, to be that master of your craft. What we know, just coming back, is the connect stuff. So when we do connect with people, that gives us a boost of oxytocin, which is one of our happy hormones. Acting on things as well will help us with our dopamine when we've sort of set ourselves a plan, and then we know that we're working towards something because we've got some certainty around that. Or say if your act was around nutrition, we know that 90% of your serotonin, which is another happy hormone, is made in your gut. So if you're nourishing yourself well, that's going to impact your mood too. Then L stands for laugh. So find something that's going to make you belly laugh. and again, it's very different for a lot of us. But we know that a belly laugh gives you a boost of endorphins. And then the final thing is M stands for move. So how am I going to move today? And we know that movement also can give us a boost of endorphins. And this can be about just finding ways in your day that, you might just choose one meeting or one conversation that you're going to have that you can do while you're moving, right? Turn off your video camera and just focus on your listening skills. And we know even just doing that and focusing on your listening skills is going to give your brain a bit of a rest as well, because you're not having to process all this visual information. So that's one of the simple things. Just do that. It takes 2 minutes. Do it before you turn on get into your phone in the morning, share that with someone. That's a great one. The other thing that I think is really coming back to, what we can control, but it's good for our mood and good for our creativity, especially when we're at work, is the importance of play. So Lego did some really interesting research where they found that 8 out of 10 adults said that when they play, that actually reduces their stress. But I think that as adults, sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to do that.
Yep.
It might feel a bit frivolous or something like that. I think, so there's sort of 2 ways that you can approach it. One is, if you've got kids, then Lego obviously is a really great thing to do with your children. It forces you to be present with them, creates quality time moments. What I encourage parents to do here is actually get your child to actually tell you what the next thing to do is, right? So they're the boss, in a way, and they're describing what the instructions are saying. They're choosing the right pieces, the right colors, those sorts of things. And so you're then focusing on the behavior, essentially, that the child's doing versus the outcome as well, because we all know that with Lego, you're not always going to get 100% right either. You might have to go back and forth or whatever. And those little things are, they're good for us to learn as well, is that little failures are good for us. They help us learn. And then the other thing is that I was lucky that Lego has actually come out with these 2 adult sets. So we've got an excuse because they're designed for adults. The Botanicals collection, which has got a bonsai tree and a bouquet, and they're sustainable plant-based plastics made from sugarcane. And what they're great at in terms of like a work context is that what we know is that we're more productive when we take micro breaks. Right, so if we're just sort of like, you can spend hours and hours sometimes staring at a problem and not really get to a solution. So if you can incorporate micro breaks into that. So there's NASA research that says the most productive is like 47 minutes and then 13 minutes, but most people just sort of say 10 minutes an hour. And so you might just choose, you're going to do 4 steps, in those instructions around that pack of Lego. And it's quite a cool thing, right? Because it creates an interesting conversation as well, because you got something on your desk or you can talk to people about it. And then when you do that, you're sharing or encouraging other people at the same time to actually do those behaviors as well. But the other thing which is really great about what these little micro breaks do for us from a neuroscience point of view is that the brain lights up in 2 different ways for the creative process. And we all need to be creative in our jobs in some way, right? Whether that's thinking differently, solving problems, actually coming up with new sources of innovation or creating value, whatever it means. All of us, so no one ever got hired for a job, right? When they said, I'm just going to do it the way it's always been done. We hire people because we want new ways of thinking. We want them to challenge the status quo. And so what we know is that these types of activities where we get out of our heads and into our hands and into our senses, they switch on a part of the brain which is called the default mode network, or DMN. And this part of our brain, the way it lights up, is actually underdeveloped in a lot of us, especially adults. It works really well as kids. Like 95% of children at 5 years old test at genius level for creativity, and then by the time we get to being adults, by the time we get to 30, it's only 2%, right? And so these tools, like Lego in this case, right, are great ways for us to switch on our DMN so that we can think more broadly, we can think more laterally, because we're just letting our brain have a bit of a rest from that sort of normal busyness that we're always putting it through. So those are two simple things that I just think, if we come back to rhythms, we go, okay, well, if I can get a calm plan into my morning rhythm, and I go, before I even look at my phone, I'm going to create my calm plan, and I'm going to share that with somebody. And then I might say, okay, well, there's a part of my day, or there's a project I'm working on which requires me to think a bit creatively. There's a problem I'm trying to solve. How might I just incorporate a little bit of play into that to actually help me get a better creative outcome?
You've mentioned so many tools, tips, tricks, everything, and it's you obviously are very passionate about your craft, which is easy. Which like I like to say that we're passionate. It's our passion that drives us, right? And same for you. But your passion's all about making people get the best out of themselves, right? And which is, mate, it's so unique and so inspiring to hear. I mean, and I got to say, Lego's my go-to for my out of work time as well, right? The ability to make something, the satisfaction of that, but also at the same time being creative and doing it with people it's such a great pastime. And so have we lost something there? Can you still hear us?
I can still hear you. I lost the video.
Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know what happened there. All good. The other thing is which is probably kidding me, but I think doing things that take me back to being a kid allow me to know that, life's not that serious all the time as well, right? Like I'm a big fan of FIFA on the Xbox. That's the only thing I can play. So I do that in my spare time. But I mean, mate, it's great. And I think in our world, right? Like sometimes there's been times where we've forgotten about ourselves and forgotten about making sure that our staff are taken care of as well, because we're so busy and so quick in getting stuff done. But we always, and that's why I mentioned before, we put that motivational check in every week, because if we don't put time aside to check on ourselves and what we're doing, and then months will go past and it's too late, right? People are burnt out. People have thought about maybe other jobs or leaving or whatever it is, and you put your heart and soul into creating something that you need to take care of it always, right? It's like eating every day, right? And so it's great. And I think other people can really benefit from what you're doing. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and get access to you and what you do?
First of all, thank you for that. It's very, very generous and kind for you to say those things. I think, I know that the reason I do what I do is the reason I can do what I do is a result of privilege. Yeah. I've had an extraordinary amount of investment in me because of the roles that I've had. I've had, incredible access. I've got great mentors and coaches. I've done leadership development. I've had a lot of therapy as well. So I'm a big fan of psychotherapy as a way, especially for dealing with my perfectionism. And so, all I'm trying to do basically is just pay back those things.
Awesome.
And so I think like what most people will find, and this is so important when we talk about how you increase the frequency and quality of self-care conversations in an organization, is that the only place you need to focus is just the place to start, right? So, and you don't need to, and I just said, but you don't need to be an expert, a dietitian or a nutritionist to eat more vegetables, right? You don't need to be a neuroscientist to know how to light up your brain. Yeah. And so these are all little skills that we can try. And then also coming back to this, I guess this being vulnerable, it's not scary to have a conversation around, their calm plan or what rhythms, they're trying to incorporate, what boundaries they've set themselves up for. Like these are all things that we should be normalizing as conversations in our organizations, in our teams, and even just with our friends and family, right? Just a way of looking in and checking in on each other. And even when you do that, even though you might just be saying, okay, well, this is a time of day that I want to focus on my creative work, so you're trying to create some boundaries and that you're communicating with that. But when you ask people about that, you just, by default, you're showing that you care about them,
100%.
Right? You want them to be at their best, and so this language that we can use around just what energizes us versus what depletes us, or everyone gets a smile on their face when you talk about energy vampires. Yeah. Right. Because we all think about those people. But then we also all know that, like, what I believe is that no one actually wants to be an energy vampire, right? We don't. If someone told you an energy vampire, you'd be horrified. And so those are things where if we're just aware of how, when we don't look after ourselves, we do, leave ourselves open to actually being that energy vampire to other people. But then if we sustain it, then we can lead ourselves down the path of other, more serious issues as well.
That's awesome. So where can they get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. So that was the question. So the best way, so my website, so energx.com.au.
Beautiful.
There's no Y. So it's just energx.com.au. You can email me directly, just Sean, SEAN, at energx.com.au, or a lot of people actually connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to give away a lot of value on LinkedIn, just sharing or like doing little conversations like we're having here today, and just sharing snippets. So that there's something that people can just take away and use very practically, and immediately around things. So that's sort of, easily the easiest ways to get hold of me.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. And we'll put your details in the show notes along with the show.
Cool. Sean, mate, you've been a great person to chat to. The stuff that you're doing is fantastic, and we all need to focus on ourselves, and what you're doing is inspirational, and we love it, and you've inspired me to try different things today, and I hope our audience feels the same way. Like Dom said, we'll put your details in our show notes, but in a 6 months time or so, we should get you back on again and see how your journey's gone. We'd love to do that with you.
Yeah, I would love to do that too. I think, I think we really have a great opportunity at the moment to, whilst this is sort of, pardon the pun, top of mind for everybody, to actually, like, I really believe we can come out of this better than we went in.
100%.
Like, we already had these epidemics of mental health issues before. Then COVID's just sort of exacerbated, normalized things, as we said before. But if we just bring ourselves back to these simple practices, and literally, like, if there's one thing I ask people to remember, if you just look back on your day and just go, how many of the decisions did I make today were energy vampire decisions versus energist decisions, right? And then just tomorrow, just make one more energist decision than you did, right? Just get that balance up. And I think if we could just do that simple reflection, those tiny steps incrementally, you're gonna see your battery start to recharge.
Awesome, Sean. Mate, really appreciate it. Thanks for being on the Let's Be Mates podcast. And good luck with your journey, and we'll definitely talk to you soon.
Awesome. Great to chat to you guys.
Thanks, mate. If this episode has brought up any mental health issues, contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
Thanks for listening to the Let's Be Mates podcast by the team at Mate.
Search for the Let's Be Mates podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and at letsbemates.com.au. Hit subscribe to get the latest episode each week.
For all your telco needs, choose a provider you can trust like a mate. Visit letsbemates.com.au, Google Mate, or call us on 13 14 13 to sign up today.
See you soon, mate.